Why do I think flow and deep work are superpowers for you? And I think it's really centered around a key question for the next century. What is it going to take for you to thrive in the new economy? This new economy, it's different, right? AI is there, work is being automated away. 90% of us are now knowledge workers. Okay? So Cal Newport talked about this and thinks there's two core abilities, and I agree with him. So one is going to be the ability to quickly master hard things. Right? The easy stuff is all going to be done by quick little AI you're going to spin up. But the hard things are going to need our supercomputers and our experiences and knowledge. And the ability to produce at an elite level in both quality and speed, right? Something that's going to stand out. Because there are just too many other places where they can produce something. You're going to have to stand out, right? And this is the relationship between quality and speed. I think that flow and deep work are essential skills for that. Cal Newport spends a lot of time arguing for deep work in that one, and we'll talk about why I think these two are really complementary. All right, for this first part though, I'm going to ask you a favor, and that favor I think is really going to be more, rather than just giving you concepts, I want you to have a bit of an experience. And for that, I'm going to have to ask your inner critic to go for a walk outside, maybe grab a drink, and we're going to use the psychological principles of resilience, which is courage, hope, and optimism, especially hope for you today. Which I'm going to talk about some terms, especially with flow, which is a hard one. Deep work, I think, is very practical and easy to understand. But this feeling of flow, not to imagine that you're in flow, but that you can get to flow. Right? Luckily, there's been many people who've been here, but it's should be a magical experience, right? And it should be something that if we can get more of it in our lives, we can radically change things. So bear with me and let your critic go for a walk and feel a little bit of hope with me today, okay? So flourishing, as I talked about, is often this soft concept. We dive into it a lot more in the first session, but I wanted to give you a sense of one, why I think it's important, and then two, a little bit of a feeling of what it would feel like if you're moving towards flourishing. Right? And I try to do that in every session I do because it's a concept in which, rather than being a soft, how are you feeling like you're flourishing? Right? It's developing into a rigorous research concept that places like the Harvard Center for Human Flourishing and now the Global Happiness Index are starting to use that as a concept instead of happiness. We'll talk about why, I think, as we discuss happiness, being beyond happiness with flow. It's developing as a tremendous body of knowledge, right? It's coming from psychology and neuroscience, and I think other sciences are going to come into it. It's also something that we can use to improve our own lives, and I think how we can help to make changes, both for ourselves and the groups we work in. I also think that it's something that we could use to help create communities and societies that we want to live and grow in. I think it's what I'm hoping that hopefully in this century, many of our social institutions will be geared around optimizing for this. Not for money spent, not for money saved or money earned, right? But how are the people that they're serving flourishing? For me, I think it's critically important that that's for healthcare in particular, or any of the caring institutions and education. So what does it feel like if you're moving towards flourishing? So if you're starting to flourish, it means that you're starting to function within the limits of human potential, both physically, emotionally, and socially. Flourishing people are moving towards being happy and satisfied. They are seeing their lives as having purpose. They are developing some sense of mastery. They are starting to accept all parts of themselves, right? And they have a sense of personal growth. They feel like always growing, evolving, and changing. Right? And then they have a sense of autonomy that they develop. They develop and intentionally create a sense of an internal locus of control. We'll talk about how that's critically misunderstood as people think about experiencing flow. Got a bit of a feeling? Love to see all of you having a sense that for much of the year later on, you're starting to move towards flourishing. Like many things, it's not a state that I think you go to and then just stay and then fear losing, but it's a place that you're constantly striving towards achieving. Dr. Csikszentmihalyi didn't start out studying flow. One, the concept as he'd imagined it didn't exist at the time. And then two was, he really was just trying to understand how people work to improve their lives so that psychologists could help make people's lives better, right? He thought initially that he was just going to go around and ask people about happiness and how they pursue and perceive happiness, right? And then that was closely related to how they pursue and perceive pleasure. And then there are a whole bunch of other people who pursue the mechanisms that will let them secure happiness and pleasure, which sometimes become ends in themselves and sadly start to detract from their lives. What he ended up realizing was that many people, they pursue it for a bit, but they all know that it's not going to last, right? We neurologically adapt to pleasure, and then you have to raise the threshold. And happiness, if you're holding onto it too tight, goes away. What he did realize, though, as he spoke to all these people, was that there were a whole bunch of people, not just in peak athletes or peak clinicians or peak academics, but people across all spectrum who had the sense of an optimal experience of life. And they described it in similar ways, right? He described it best, so I'm going to read you a little bit from it. So he said, our perceptions about our lives and the outcomes of the many forces that shape our experience, each having an impact on whether we feel good or bad. Most of these forces are outside our control, especially as entrepreneurs and especially as parents, right? Yet we've all experienced times when, instead of being buffeted by anonymous forces, we do feel in control of our actions, masters of our own fate. On the rare occasions that it happens, we feel a sense of exhilaration, a deep sense of enjoyment that is long cherished and that becomes a landmark in our memory for what life should be. This is what he really meant by optimal experience. Hopefully you had some sense of that when you have children. I think they're open to this experience. How can we create something like that for you as adults? So with flow, he also had some other insights, right? As we talked about, it's not just about peak experiences. Those are the easy ones to talk about. But in his book, he discusses all walks of life having these experiences. And not just when you're feeling happy, right? He met with people who had experienced concentration camps, who found moments of flow when they just shared a piece of bread with somebody, right? And then they had these similar aspects and elements. We'll talk about what those aspects and elements are in a recipe for you to strive for flow. This other insight that he had is also really important, and we'll get to it, especially as it applies to deep work. Contrary to what we usually believe, moments like these, the best moments in our lives, are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something that is both difficult and worthwhile. What this means is that optimal experience is something that we can make happen. I'll ask you to keep this in mind because people often apply flow not always to the things that are both difficult and worthwhile, but it is an important concept, and I think it's the thing that will move you furthest. If you can find the things that you think are most worthwhile and seemingly now impossibly difficult, but apply some of the flow techniques, I think you can slowly start moving in that direction, and that would be wonderful for the world. Okay, that's great. Sounds a little bit theoretical, a little bit complicated. So how can we quickly understand this, and what can you take away? And I think the simple thing is to say there was like one really powerful book, and if you can just remember one thing for flow, I'd remember this. Right? I'm going to ask you for one other thing for deep work, but it would be just remember this curve, and then just figure out how you can put yourself on it. So the one axis is skills; these are your skills, right? And you're going to get to define those. And then the other one is challenges that you're experiencing. When you're up here in this corner, too much challenge, not enough skill. It's anxiety. This is called internship. And then when you're over here and you've got too many skills and there's not enough challenge for you, then it's boredom. There's a magic zone. The magic zone is where you're going to try to live, right? And that's going to be the zone of flow. And then the hope is that you're going to have not too much skill and you're going to try to choose. You're going to get given an impossible task. And you're going to break it down, break it down, break it down, break it down until you think there's a challenge that you might be able to get to if you could develop your skills a bit more, right? So you get to this one, and then you develop your skills, and now you're here, and now it gets to be boring. And then you raise the challenge, and then you go more, right? That's, I think, where we think you're living in flow. In his book, he's got a recipe for finding flow, and this is his recipe, right? And I think it's great because when he did the study, he found that many people expect to find far more flow in their personal lives than in their work lives. But they found that 70% of the time at work, you have the conditions necessary to find flow at work. Most people don't, because one, there are a few extra steps you need to do, and two is they expect not to, right? They expect work to be boring or not important. So you're going to set an overall goal. This can be set by somebody else and can have external measures, but then you're going to break it down into sub-goals. And those sub-goals, you should have control over. That's one of the key steps. Then you're going to find some way of measuring progress, right? And this is the way, like I'm surfing or I'm climbing a rock wall. How do I know when I'm doing well? Right? You're going to try to find some similar measure that will give you a sense of velocity. That's what's going to engage your mind in flow. You're going to concentrate on what you're doing, and you're going to make finer and finer distinctions, which these nice little measures of progress are going to let you do. And you're going to be focused on the challenges, right? So flipping it from what are the problems that I'm solving, then to what are the skills that I need to face this challenge. That's another critical step. Most people just sit there and go, this is a boring thing, and I don't want to do it. That's my problem. My problem is it's boring. But instead they're saying, what are the skills that I'm missing to do this as fast as possible, right? Or to get it done. And then you're going to keep raising the stakes. Many people don't. They're like, I just want to go there and zone out, and I'm not going to do it. Um, so talking through a sort of a practical example of one where like flow is used, but not the ideal one, but an easy one to sort of talk about. I had a friend who was in medical school, and he got a job in the lab. He was very excited about the research they were doing. And what did he have to do? He had 300 pipetting experiments to do. So there he was, and his day-to-day experience of this illustrious Ivy League research experience was that he had to sit there for 6 to 8 hours pipetting, right? A simple repetitive task that he didn't find a lot of challenge in. But he had heard about flow, and he said, "Oh, great, I'm going to try it." So his goal was to finish doing the experiments, right? First, he was like, "Is this a worthwhile task for me?" It felt far beneath what he thought was his activities. Can he get somebody else to do it? He couldn't, right? There was no one else who would do this. Was there? Could he delegate it, automate it, delete it, right? He couldn't do any of those things. Then he redefined the goal. Was the goal worthwhile? The research he was doing was interesting to him. He was the person to do it. Now he had the goal. Now he had sub goals. What was his sub goal? His sub goal was, how can I do this as accurately but as fast as possible? And that became his challenge, right? So how do I optimize and make this more efficient? So he set himself a few sub goals about how do I do these 10 as quickly as possible, then measured himself for it, thought about how he did it, what could he change, and then got faster and faster and faster until he was doing 20 in that same period of time and more. The time went very quickly. He developed a bunch of super pipetting skills. He got to his worthwhile goal. That's how most people can use it in their day-to-day life, and I think that's where the 70% is. But it's not a strong use of flow. And in the strong use of flow, I want you to get into that flow where people have peak experiences, but that's going to require this difference of you not focusing on where I'm not doing so well and more on what your strengths are. The challenge is that not everybody at work says, hey, here are your strengths, why don't you go ahead and use them? But I think there's a way that you can capture that. Right? And this is the concept of golden time. We introduced it briefly last time. We've embedded it into the system so that people can start to break into this golden time. And this entire row up here is all just golden time. It goes from 5 minutes to 45 minutes of it. The ultimate goal is, though, to help you to break into it and then to move to 4 to 6 hours a week. And there are organizations who do this already. So what's golden time? Golden time is based on the system of like, how do we learn the most important things that we do as quickly as possible at staggeringly large rates? We do it as children through play. Right? Our minds are these massive super connected machines that are integrating things all the time. And if you have any interest in the work that you're doing, right, and you have any kind of unique experience, and you're not doing professional playtime, then you and your organization are really missing out on some impactful leaps that you could help people make. Because nobody has your experience, right? Nobody knows these other things that you could bring to bear. And nobody's going to be thinking about it in your unique way. What are organizations that do use this? So some groups like Google, right? They call this 20% time. The engineers can just work on whatever they want. I think every organization could potentially benefit from this. 20% time is like 20%. So an entire day they get to do this. Other organizations try to do this and maintain it. Does any value come out of this that we know about? Yeah, so Gmail, right? Gmail came out of 20% time. Google AdWords, arguably the foundation for this, came out of this kind of 20% time. Imagine if we were working on Sea Ahead or Deep Currents projects together and having this ability. So I help people just break into this. You just sit down. The goal is you sit down and you're going to just start with 5 minutes of golden time. And the goal is that you sit down, just explore what you're interested in the ultimate mission of what your organization is doing. No outcome, no goal. You're not going to have to do something. Then slowly build it up so that you're doing 45 minutes of time. And then hopefully we'll get you to 4 to 6 hours. And you'll see tremendous outcomes in the organization. That's where I think you can really take it at strength. Okay, my little button's going off. It's 25. I have to start talking to you about deep work. All right. So that's flow. We've explored it at sort of like a breakneck speed, I guess the fire hose of flow. We'll come back and just sort of like recap a little bit at the end. We're going to dive straight into deep work. Please come and take a seat. There are lots of seats. You'd be welcome to join us there. So deep work, in Cal Newport's book, has his formal definition. Both of his definitions of deep work and shallow work are interesting and I think encapsulate sort of some of the core ideas that you may not get just from this intuitive sense of deep work. Most people, I think, have an understanding already of what deep work is like because we had to do this at kids' school. You had some really massive project to do, right? And you had to dive in, and then you needed space and time to do it. For Cal Newport, deep work is professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to the limit. Right? So that's where the flow integration. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. This is why it's a superpower, right? If you're going to thrive in the new economy, you've got to learn how to do this. Deep work's valuable, right? So Cal Newport explores this a lot in his book with a lot of different concepts. I've been trained in medicine. It's like I had to go to sort of the primary sources myself. And why do I think it's valuable? We explored this a lot in the last session. From studies of neuroscience, we know that we are not good multitaskers, right? So we're going to be task switching if you're asking us to do that. But monotasking for complex and deep things are really important. Distractions, right, that occupy that result in a switching cost, right? There are two aspects to switching costs that are the toughest one. That little note, you're busy doing deep work, that little notification pops up in the corner, right? You glance at it, you say, "Oh no, I'm busy focusing. I'm not gonna look at that." But unfortunately, your brain has seen that, and now what happens? Like you're resetting back to where you were. You've been interrupted. So that train of thought you have to sort of reload. So that's sort of close to fixed cost. The worst part of it, though, is that there are two aspects of this. There's the tasking, like reloading the task, and then there's the filtering, right? So you've got centers in your brain that are filtering out external and internal signals so that they're focused only on the task that you're solving on. That's the one that takes a long time to recalibrate, right? When you're driving and you have a 1 or 2 second interaction with the voice activated system, it takes over 18 seconds for that filtering to come back to normal, right? So now it's an email. People say, oh, even that simple distraction can take over 20 minutes for you to return to that same. We want to make sure we don't do that. But Narath, you say, no, this is what modern work looks like. How cool it is. There we are. We've all got like Slack and email and chat, and we're texting each other. We're sitting across from each other, and we're working on like 15 things. This is what the CEO startup wants to see, right? Yeah, great. Like it can be very effective, and there's a wonderful book about user stories and user story mapping. And creative collaboration with groups can be super powerful, but they need to be constrained and they need to be done in a way such that authority and hierarchy doesn't rule. You get everybody's thoughts, right? And then you're still going to have times where you're going to work like either in pairs or smaller groups to go and really dive into deep ideas that you'll be developing. If you're somebody like me who like recognizes how stressful and how energy sapping it can be to be trying to do deep work while other people are doing their work around you, then you can speak to them and say, look, hey, you're asking me to do shallow work, right? So what's shallow work? Cal Newport's definition is it's non-cognitively demanding, right? Because I'm busy listening to all these other people do the things. Can't be cognitively demanding if I'm going to get it done. It's non-cognitively demanding, logistical style tasks. I'm answering emails. There you go. I'm rocking the decision making that are often performed while you're distracted. These efforts tend not to create much value in the world, and they're easy to replace. But wait, I'm the CEO of the organization. I need to make these decisions. If you've ever had a day where you've gotten home and you're like, oh, that was so exhausting. I got home. What did I do all day? Oh yeah, I answered a bunch of emails, right? Even in those times where you're a decision maker, there's a big difference between saying like, I answered like a ton of emails, all at different levels of complexity versus I had them bucketed for me. I thought about the most strategically important ones with all the data I needed, made the appropriate decisions quickly, right? And then had all the shallow stuff done in a shorter period of time. That's what the other alternative is. It's not just shallow work. It's shallow, inefficient work. How inefficient? Right? So the neuroscience studies suggest around 20 to 40% less efficient. Right? If I could just give you that back, how much time, and if we could translate it into money for you, would we make for you in a year? A lot. And it's shallow, inefficient, and tiring work. Those fMRI studies that I was showing you, that's glucose uptake, they require massively more glucose energetically to do task switching than it does to be focused on the same task sequentially. So you're going to be much more exhausted at the end of the day. Deep work is rare. Hopefully this will change this century, right? And we'll have lots of places and institutions where deep work will be the norm, right? And you can just naturally fall into it. But now it's rare. If you are somebody who can develop a skill, I think you're going to really be differentiated. And then deep work is meaningful. What do you mean? How could deep work be meaningful? Here it was working with someone, they explained it in a way much better. After we'd worked together for a while, they were starting to get much more deep work that helped to avoid the tyranny of the apparently urgent, right? All these technologies that are not triaging for us, they're just throwing it at us. Um, they described by being able to do more deep work, not only was their work much more satisfying, they were able to reconnect to the purpose of the mission because they were really moving it forward, right? So they felt recharged in the enjoyment of the work while they felt that their quality and the impact they had went way up. That's why it's meaningful. Okay, there are 4 simple rules that he describes, but then lots of techniques. These are in the book, why I highly recommend it. The first one, where a lot of it is spent, is in working deeply, because that's where the rubber hits the road. If you know how to do this, then you can find, you don't need large blocks of time. You can find smaller and smaller blocks if you need to, but you'll still want to try to do as much as you can to do the larger blocks. We're going to dive into one of the critical sessions here in just a few minutes. The other one is to embrace boredom. And this is really, I think, taken in the best way from mindfulness, right? Which is that your brain is very powerful, but it needs space and time to give you its insights. If you're constantly solving a problem, your brain can't do the integration function that it needs to and say, there's a different way to solve that problem. Or are you solving the right problem, right? Which are critically important for us. The other one, which he's become famous for, is quitting social media, right? He has received lots of aggressive ones. For him, it's really about quitting if you can, right? Which he would still say this demonstrable value, or just creatively constraining your social media use, right? The average US citizen spends 2 hours and 3 minutes on social media a day. I'm betting there's some value, some enjoyment, but I'm betting most people wouldn't say that's how much time they would want to spend. And then the other one is to drain the shallows. Yet another one. Really here, what he means is needing to overcome this hyperactive hive mind. The creation we have unnecessarily of all of this busy work and constant noisy communication. He describes a lot more of the things here in his 2021 book, which came off this deep work was in 2016, A World Without Email, where he really describes techniques to overcome the hyperactive hive mind. Okay, deep work sounds good. Hopefully I've convinced you, hopefully not overcomplicated it. Deep work is something we should all do. The hardest thing is, like, even when you've got this intuitive ones, how do I make time for it, right? My days are so busy, I see it's there, I'm gonna have to come in early, stay late in order to do it. I don't think so, right? And it's not the way that we're gonna make it sustainable. We've been working with over a year now, helping people and organizations find ways to make deep work. We've had some successes, right? But we've also had to apply it ourselves. And Helly can certainly speak to whether we're doing this or not during the discussion. But we've had to, eat our own dog food, I think is the one. So we use 7 techniques ourselves that have helped us to find time for deep work. So one is we control our calendar by designing our time. I'll give you a template for that in a few slides. We use time blocking, right? We make it enough time by using flex time blocks really well. I'll talk to you about that. We talk about being intentional with our time. This is a device that, for me, like, I had to have some additional boost in order to help me be very intentional. We talked a lot about this in our session 1. We use techniques to declutter our mind, and this is really using a trusted, effective, finite, not infinite, task trust system. If you're holding tasks in your mind, you're utilizing precious cycles, you just need to get it out somewhere. We have a template for you for that. We use rituals to create balance. Shutdown ritual, which gives us our evenings and our weekends back, even as we work very hard during the day. Right? And we use team norms to create space for everyone to do this well. Okay, so how do you do it? So what's time blocking, and how would you do it? Turns out it's a technique well described in Cal Newport's 2016 book, but some people have been doing it for a while. And this is a photo from Benjamin Franklin's diary, which, as you may know, was written between 1771 and 1790 and published first in 1793. And he clearly used time blocking, right? And he was very productive, right? I'm not saying correlation versus causation is always the one, but it's certainly something that he shared very quickly, used it to good effect. What did I start doing when this was my template one? And I'll just share with people, say, like, what did it work for me? There's The Science of Perfect Timing, a book by Daniel Pink, and he talks about how energetically there seem to be 3 kinds of people. People who start out early in the morning with their major energy. So this would be the lark one. And so for me, doing deep work in the morning is best. My mind is freshest. I've got energy. This is where the most important work in the day is gonna happen. There are other people who are owls, and they have a small burst, then they dip, and then they have their big burst later. And then a lot of people who like doing a lot of their work later in the day. So we can adjust it for that. But this is the one where, for most people, they're larks or in-betweeners, and these can work really well. You are coming in fresh. You're not distracted by the other things. Then I would get to the shallow work time, which I would constrain. I would only let people book times with me here, or I do my best to move meetings into these times, right? And then I'd try to have a deep work session in the afternoon, and then I'd do my flex and my shutdown. So that's how we started. It had some of the principles. You're welcome to try it. It's easy to sort of try to integrate with most other schedules. I was like getting to email by 11, so people were, where have I gotten to now? Like, what you'll find is that if you can have more deep work blocks together, you will get much more done. There's less loading and unloading, and I've become much more aggressive about doing this. In the science of perfect timing, they also talk about these other superpowers, which are doing exercise, doing it outside, right? Which will give you much more of the trough part of your day back. So you'll go through this high, all this energetically. You're going through this trough where you're not going to be at your peak, so you should use it for other things. Gym and lunch is the best meal of the day, so you do that. Then I come back, I'm somewhat refreshed. I do sort of this shallow or collaborative time, right? Which I'm trying to reframe it to be less negative. So I call it social and collaboration time. It's really fun to talk to people. And then I have this flex block, and the flex block became its own. It's easy and tempting. In the beginning, I would let people schedule time here, but it's really for me. What does the flex block mean? I was pretty good at getting a lot of tasks almost done. Feel like me, like you're almost done, but then they just hang out, right? Because I wrap up my day, I'm racing home, I don't get to do it. I would finish 40%, completely finish the last 40% of my tasks if I gave myself some flex time in the day. You will find that like you are never as productive as when you have that period of time for yourself, and it's a chance to wrap up those things. And then I had 30 minutes to shut down, and then I am off. I've told my brain I'm not working. There's a lot of work around the shutdown ritual. We can't dive into it today, but it's another technique I can't recommend enough. This is a template that we use, not for people to track their time, but for them to sit down beforehand and say, design your week. Right? It's just got some blocks. You choose whatever the hour schedules are, and then just say, design your week. Right? So this is available if you sign up with us, or just email us. We'll send it to you, or just make your own. It's not complicated, right? And then just do that. Just do that once, and then just redesign it, and then see how it goes for you. It'll be a very powerful technique. Okay, I made it in time. The 45-minute hasn't gone off, but one of the most important part of these sessions is less the giant fire hose and more the chance for us to explore and discuss. Many people know about flow. I'd love to talk about who's been able to be somewhat successful and what they use that they could share, and any specific challenges you think you might have. And then certainly with deep work, where I think it's tomorrow you can start using time blocking to try out a few deep work blocks for yourself. You can explore whether it's the morning, the early afternoon, or the late afternoon that's going to work for you, right? And then if tomorrow you sit down and say, I'm going to design my week, I'll give you one hint. Next week is probably already packed for you, right? So when I work with people, I start with them saying, 2 weeks from now, how can we redesign your schedule? Because then there's still lots of time to move around the blocks, to block off your calendar, to put in the deep work blocks so people can't overschedule it, and change how you're going to schedule your standing meetings. So let's turn it over to you. Tell me, what are some challenges? And Helly, if you'll tell us if there's any questions or other things that came online. Oh, yes. And I'll use the microphone just so the other people can hear us. Great. Is this recorded? Yes.
Any tricks that work for you in and out of the flow?
In and out of the flow. Okay, perfect.
Like mentally, anything that will get you in. That's the biggest difficulty for me. Making myself go flow. Once I get in, I can't get out. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's hours.
Yeah, fantastic. So great question, and I love the way you've phrased it. It's often this one like, are we life hacking? Right? So tips or tricks to do that. Last time I tried to like just open it up and get other people's ones. It wasn't as time efficient, and just for the time, so I'll leap in first, but then I'll open it up to say like, does anybody else have other tips or tricks? But if anybody has a burning one, please feel free to go first. I don't mean to dominate it in that way. So things for flow. There are things that I find just that I think are very human, which is designing the context helps a little bit. right? So choosing the space in which you flow matters. What I often found and have found, especially with remote, what people are calling remote work, but it's really like working in your home, is that people don't use all the other cues that we get to create context for ourselves. So I had friends like, so say you can't come, so one was coming to the CIC, it was transformative for us, right? So you could get there, and you're like, this is where I do that part of the work. And then there are other spaces you can use to say, this is the part where I go and do my shallow work, right? So when I'm doing my shallow work, I can go to the noisy side. But when I'm doing my deep work, I sit in dolce all the time. The people around me are quiet. I can be quiet. I see them focusing. I know they're focusing. I feel like I should focus. There's lots of cues you can embrace. A friend who was working from home, um, which I still love this idea of like remote work, as if like work is not embodied in you. They're working in a constrained physical environment, which is the same one. They just created a space, and their shallow work time was on the couch, and then they did flow work time in a corner on the kitchen table. The key thing for them was to create some kind of sign that said, hey, I'm doing deep work. Ellie can speak much more authentically to it. All these incredible women who are super smart, creative, and talented, and they're working on the kitchen table, and anybody who walks by interrupts them. Their chances of doing deep work are not great. So we were trying to create mechanisms and ways that we could signal I'm doing deep work. For me, it's why I built like this one. My mind was, through medical training, I was constantly being interrupted and getting huge amounts of documentation all the time, and I had 15 to 20-minute visits that I had to master. My mind was trained to be distracted. And so for me, I made this a blue sky 45-minute timer, and I would commit to it, right? And so when my mind was starting to be distracted, I would see that I'd put this light on, and that was my mindful commitment. So choosing some kind of object like that are some of the techniques that have really helped me. The one thing I'd make a plug for is library spaces, and Cal Newport has used that to great effect. You can find your corner cubby, go there. When I work with students, I really try to say, don't use a single library space for all the things. Sound like they might help? Anyone else with a few? All right, another question? Oh,
Sometimes the most innovative ideas, they come in the shower, which is not part of the block.
yes.
At other times, you may be stuck, and so the block may not be that fruitful to continue.
Yes.
So it seems to be important to be flexible in that regard.
Yep.
One further point, sometimes making advances requires other people. And so it seems the skill set must be some partly technical and partly social. I wonder if you'd comment on that.
Great. So wonderful sort of insights, multi-part. If I can, I'll take the first part first, and then we'll get to sort of the social and cultural changes. So the first part, like anybody had like some of your best ideas are like while you're in the shower, right? So I think we've had that experience. It turns out that there's like a neuroscience correlate for this, which is if I showed you that picture of the functional MRI of the brain of somebody who is doing complex tasking, that there are three centers that are primarily involved. So there are ones in the parietal lobe, there's two, and then there's one in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is our most recently developed part of the brain. It's also the most deeply integrated. And it turns out that when they also do studies of like, and they'd have people just relax, not have anything in their mind, and then see if any insights came, it turns out that part of the prefrontal cortex activated. It was the same part, right? But what happens is that when it is occupied with a task, it downregulates the other signals that let it create these integrative big solutions. So that's the reason why, creating space for yourself through meditation, through walking, through just getting up and going somewhere else, and not listening to an audiobook, not playing music, not doing anything else, gives you that space and time. And I think that if you do some small personal experiments and try this out for yourself throughout the day. We had the first innovator in the session talked about how she transformed the impact that she was having as a CEO of a startup by walking to the CIC, which took her 30 minutes. No phone, like nothing on, just walking. And all of a sudden, from the stress of the home environment to here, she was able to reset and had a clear idea of what it was that she was going to do. Highly recommend that for you. So that's, I think, powerful insight. I think that the flexibility one we went to just now, but I think that you asked about sort of how do we do these how do we make the cultural changes that are needed? Like there's a part social one. My boss expects me to be super responsive. I had this. I worked, as soon as I'd completed residency and I was working as a primary care attending, I was also the chief medical officer for a startup company with Clayton Christensen. It's leader of disruptive innovation, working in healthcare. Our CEO expected us, had set this unintentionally, had set a standard where if I emailed him on the weekend, he would get back to me right away. Right? And so now all of a sudden he gave me the signal like, whoa, now I have to do it. So sometimes he would email me. And then I'd feel the stress of having to say, I've got to get back right away. And this cultural standard just developed. It's the default. This hyperactive hive mind is the default because it's convenient and flexible. Right? So Cal Newport talks a lot about why it developed. But I think I saw it changed instantly overnight. And there was a great book, I can't recommend it enough, written by the late Clay Christensen, which was How Will You Measure Your Life? Ideally, you'll find a loved one or your CEO or whoever and take a long car trip and listen to it together. Because it will help sort of set the standard for how other things matter the most. And then setting effective team norms can be really helpful. And they don't have to be dramatic, right? So you can just be thoughtful about meeting times. And you just say, look, we're not going to have meetings before 10 because that's when most people's deep work time is going to be best, right? They're going to come better prepared. We're not going to do that after 4 because that's when people are shutting down. And we can just be clear and explicit about response expectations, right? Look, if it's really urgent, call me. I'll step out of whatever meeting, but there's a higher threshold for them to do that, right? So call me. Look, if you Slack me and you @mention me, then I'll get back to you when I'm not away, right? And so we built the device to say, I'm going to start my deep work timer. It instantly sets my Slack status to away because you're we should use technology to inform people there. And then look, if you email me, I'll get back to you, but I'm not going to get back to you immediately. It's not a conversational back and forth. I'll get back to you within a day if you're in my organization, right? Or within the week if you're outside. So these are some simple things that we've seen teams be very effective at changing. Did I get to that answer a little bit of the question? Socio-technical change is a giant area and topic, and we're going to see it change. Elon Musk's not doing a lot to help at this moment.
I like text better than calls sometimes.
Yeah.
Text gives me a little space.
Gives you a little space to respond as well. Okay, great. All right.
Also shut down.
Oh, great. Okay.
Should be the question.
Sorry. So the question was, what is your shutdown ritual? So this is one that's beautifully described in Cal Newport's work on a world without email. Just to tell you mine, I can certainly send you the slide where I sort of lay everything out, which we'll cover in another session. Basically, I would say the key thing for me is you want to convince your mind that there's nothing that you have to do that doesn't have a good plan for later or that you've taken care of. Because your mind will worry for you, whether you want it to or not, right? So what are the things that you worry about is some of the key things. So some things you worry about are, did I miss an important email from someone important to me, right? So for that, I use the Apple email, VIP email. And when I give them, instead of using I've got an open inbox, I'm there are people who I'm going to give permission to interrupt me in the final part of the day. I scan my VIP emails to see is there anything that I need a quick response or that seems urgent or I need to plan time for. I scan through my waiting for bucket, so I keep track of if I'm waiting for something from someone, and if there's somebody that I can send a quick note to move ahead, say hey, I'm waiting, I'm still waiting for this response. Feel free to get back to me tomorrow after 11, right? So after your deep work time, so just to give me a status update, right? Or I'm expecting this response. There's a lot of techniques for writing emails that get rid of a lot of the shallow work, which can be very powerful there in the deep work section. So I've looked at any outstanding things, I've looked at things that I'm waiting for, then I plan my day tomorrow, right? So I take all my things in my to-do list, my today list, and I move everything into next. Then I just glance at next and I say, what's going to be on my today list for tomorrow? And then I block the time for those things. If I can't block the time, then my job is to quickly communicate, hey, I can't get this done tomorrow. Can I get it done? Can I send you a note about when I can get it done tomorrow? Right? And so I've got my day scheduled for what I'm going to do. And then I prepare my deep work time, right? So the worst thing to do that happened to me all the time in the beginning was I would show up the next day to do my deep work. There would be an email that I have to look at to get the attachment. I'd open my email, and then guess what would happen? 30 minutes would go away. I'd be very distracted by that. So what I do is I drag anything that I need onto my desktop. That's for my deep work session tomorrow. So when I show up, I can be prepared. think that the final thing is like, then I pause. I just think, what have I forgotten? Because my mind will then tell me, hey, I'm worried about this thing. And then I just look up that specific thing. And then Cal Newport recommends like doing something physical because that will help your body. And so in the devotees there, they stand up from their desk and they go, shutdown complete. We were working together as a family while traveling, and that felt awkward to do. So we just do this. And they say, have you done this? And you're like, I've done this. And you're going, sound reasonable? Would it capture much of the things that you're most concerned about? Okay, great. So we're right at the very end. If I could, I'll catch your question afterwards. Thank you so much. So I wanted to just sort of wrap up and wrap up with a story that will give you a sense of the level of intensity that you are going to develop, both by some training, all right? So there's going to be some training involved, and then also as you do more deep work. And this comes actually from 1876, right? So if you were at Harvard College in 1876 to 1877, you would have noted this rather frenetic, wiry young gentleman there with mutton chops dashing around the campus. And he, as you befriended them, you'd slowly notice a paradox of time. They had never been a very good student, right? They had to work really hard to be a good student. But they were seeming to be an okay student. They got 5 honors grades out of the 7 courses they were taking. But they also had this crazy array of diverse interests, right? They were interested in boxing and wrestling and weightlifting. They were interested in dance. They were interested in poetry readings. And then they were fascinated by naturalism at the time, right? So much so that they were dissecting and then stuffing animals in their rented apartment room, not much to the enjoyment of their landlord. He was so passionate about this that in the summer, after the first freshman year, they published a well-regarded naturalist textbook. Right? So how did this person do it? Right? Well, the explanation was that they had a unique approach to schoolwork in 1876. From the letters and diaries of this person, we can tell that they looked at their school day ahead. They decided it was 8:30 to 4:30, right? They had other things to do after 4:30. They subtracted out all the time they had for classes. They did exercise once a day, and they took away lunch. These fragments, these time blocks that were left, were for schoolwork. Right? They weren't a lot of hours most of the days, right? But they got a lot done. How did they get a lot done? In those hours, they did only schoolwork, right? And they did so with this, what became a blistering intensity, right? Which let them succeed in this way with these multiple diverse interests and doing well at school. Their concentration became so intense that they were able to sustain this, right? And they imposed these hard, just barely feasible, hard deadlines on themselves that let them develop this intensity. This person was Theodore Roosevelt, using these techniques then. I think that the techniques described in deep work, done much better in the book than I've necessarily done here, and in flow, can help you develop the mental muscles to create that intensity. Using flow, that level of intensity is not going to exhaust you, but it's going to exhilarate you. I really think that anyone can truly expand their skills and their ability to do so. They can work with intensity, ideally in flow during deep work, letting you do amazing things. Thanks, everyone, and I really hope it's a great year for you.